Hi, Chad. Thanks for having us at your studio. And what we're going to be doing is expanding our artist interview format, where instead of having you come to our studio, we're going to come to your studio. Oh, wow. Okay. This is pretty fascinating. This is very set up. Is it usually, are you usually this sort of queen, or is it more like that?
No, it's usually like this, actually. It's been like this.
Interesting.
Over the last couple months, it's changed, but I did set it up, and once the series was over, I did want to see it really kind of neat and orderly. But when I'm working, it is kind of like this also. This is the most recent.
Okay.
And this is actually still happening. It's based on the Matterhorn at Disneyland. And it's a shift from everything else that you're seeing, because all the other body of work is based on a movie, is based on one film.
Okay.
So this one piece in particular is going to become a series of almost like mountains or islands.
Okay.
That are going to be sculptural, and this is going to have a mountain sort of built around it. Right now you're seeing the structure.
So this will be inside.
This is going to be inside, right, and it's going to continue to get larger, and basically there's going to be, you know, train tracks and cars running through it, and this is all going to be encased. Some of these towers will be shooting out from it, but that's what's going to happen inside all of these different islands. Okay. And the idea for this, it was just an amazing moment. I had finished this series I had been working on for months, and I was thinking, okay, well, am I going to base the next series on another film, which I thought it was, and then I found the film, and then I watched the film, and I was like, the film's terrible, it's not what I'm going to do. So I took off and I headed up the coast, and I'm driving down PCH, which I like to do regularly, just kind of be by the water. And there's one little spot where, you might know what I'm talking about. Before you get to Ventura, you pass Malibu, and you're going down PCH, and they basically blasted the side of this mountain, and so half of them,
yeah.
like so 1/8 is over here,
yeah.
right? And then you kind of go around. So at that one spot, I was like, I know exactly what I'm going to do. And it just completely came together. I'm going to start building these, because I was passing through it, and I was trying to actually photograph while I'm passing through it.
That sounds safe.
Yeah, it wasn't. And then I was like, this is it. I'm going to start creating these structures that you can actually pass through, but put all the same information and mythology and life of a child inside it. The series before this series was, and we'll go into that room later, incredibly dense and difficult, and the most personal work that I had ever made, completely autobiographical, where my own letters went in, photographs, everything. So when I finished that series, I wanted to just break away. I had done it. So after all that was finished, I had just remembered this film that I had seen maybe 15 or 20 years before. And you know when something is in your mind, but it's with you and it's part of you, but you haven't really spent the time mining it. Mm-hmm. And it's sort of like it's there. It's like a book on the shelf that's with you, but you haven't actually taken it down and read it. Or maybe you read a few pages of it and it meant something to you, but you never actually went through the whole thing. So that's what happened with this movie. Like, it was with me, and I was just like, I got to watch this again. And when I watched it again, I was like, this is what I'm going to do. There were all the elements that I had been working on for years, but when I first saw it, I didn't realize that. I just tapped into something. You know, it resonated with me.
Sort of like, oh, that's where this all came from.
Yes, exactly.
Nice.
So I watched the film again, and it's Peter Weir's Picnic at Hanging Rock. And,
yes, it is.
The film was like just completely in line with the way I've been thinking. It's a girls' school in the turn of the century, and these girls go on a day picnic, and 3 of the girls disappear, and the headmaster disappears. And that's basically the premise for the film.
Okay.
And then it becomes this whole exploration of what happened to these girls, why did this happen. But it's very, I mean, that's basically the idea, but it's the way it's shot. It's these subtle, incredibly instinctual moments that are so kind of profound and tap into, you know, just base human emotions of possession and desire and etiquette and how a woman's supposed to act and what a man's supposed to do. I mean, all these things that are kind of unsaid, that there's not even scripted lines for, that make the film really brilliant. And the pageantry. I mean, so much of it, and I was like, I would love to. I mean, I never explored a film as an inspiration. So that's kind of what so that's everything you're seeing somehow taps into some moment in the not only necessarily in the film. It could just be a concept the film explored, like you were saying. I mean, there's a lot of things in here that are not just about that. Maybe I explore, you know, a woman's role in society, which is explored in the film, but I look at it in my own life, you know, what I've seen. I'm teaching at a girls' school right now, so what I see those girls you know, do.
Right, like I mean, when you said that, I'm looking at this right here, and just the difference between these two women.
Yeah, that's actually a great example, because the school I work at is called Archer, and it's based on, Archer is from Artemis, and the Huntress. Actually, Huntress, yeah, so she's the Archer. I don't know if that's the same as Diana.
I think
but
they
it
are.
might be. I think
one
it
is Greek and one is Roman, I think.
So this is the symbol for the school.
Google that at home.
Yeah, this is the symbol, and yeah, that's actually a great example.
And you know, and the taking. I mean, there's a sort of a, you know, an allegory of like the modern taking aim at the old-fashioned, and yet it's not only just modern; it's also kind of. I mean, it's still like the sex fantasy happening.
You know who this is?
You know, if I had to guess, I would say Jane Fonda.
It's Jane Fonda.
Okay.
Yeah. And
okay, I got that one.
I think Dennis Hopper shot that.
Yeah, it kind of
in Malibu.
Yeah, it rings a bell.
Yeah.
Is it it's not entirely found images.
No. See, these suitcases here are filled with. This is all stuff that I've collected over the years from, you know, children's books, and there's more than this, but basically when I'm working on a piece, I go through the cases and I pull out what relates to the piece. And all this stuff has been collected for years, like since I was, you know, probably, I mean, it's since I was a little kid. I mean, here, this is, I keep the little prints here this is the one that I read when I was, you know, I don't know, 4 years old, 5 years old. So I keep those things around me as much as I can.
See, that's interesting to me because it's not just other people's childhoods or childhood in general, it's your actual own as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's interesting.
That's true. And now with my two kids, I have a 6-year-old and a 5-year-old, it's also incorporating their childhood a lot. So they've become part of the work. Like they'll make something, and I'll, you know, ask them if it could be used. And you'll see when we go in the other room, a lot of their own actual writings and illustrations and toys, unfortunately for them, are going in. This one I'm having an argument with my daughter about right now. She actually doesn't know it's in here because and I keep coming and I bring bags of the toys and I drop it, and then they come in the studio usually once a week and they just stand here, just looking down at this pile, and then they just start, it's kind of sad. They start pulling their own stuff away, and then it's fine. I don't use it if they really don't want me to use it.
You know, that's okay. You can pay for therapy later. And you will. You will.
I keep all this stuff around me so that while I'm working, and I know where everything is, but it might, if it's something that I've been thinking about using while I'm, let's just say, this piece was different because I had this girl against the wall, and I did have this oval shape that I had cut here, and I kind of put the two together in my mind. And yes, you're right, I have to have a sense. I don't pencil it out because I want it to sort of be organic and there would be
the tearing itself.
Yeah, so I try to just sort of like eyeball it, and sometimes I'll put the image close so it's close, but I really don't want it to be scientific in that, you know, I know exactly where it's going and I know she's going to fit. So if it doesn't work, something else is going in there. So sometimes it's just sort of like knowing what's in the space, and it just naturally, I grab it and it feels right. Other times it is creating, these are all floor plans, okay, and when we go in the other room I'm going to show you also, but basically sometimes I'll just stuff into the floor plans, you know, some of that information, some of that text and imagery, and while I use a drill, I used basically two things, a drill and an ice pick, and I try not to really every once in a while exact a blade, but it's too precise. So when I dig in, I'm kind of hoping, it's almost like uncovering and hoping that there's going to be something in there, but you don't really know what it is. So that's usually how it's done. And that whole process of trying to sort of figure it out, and the struggle and the tension and the fight of it is really what interests me. The precision doesn't really interest me. And a lot of that has to do, again, going back to this childlike way of sort of being, where a child can just play and try to discover, and there's that joy and that excitement of figuring something out for the first time. I want the work to have that. Mm-hmm. and so that's why I also keep shifting materials, because I don't want to really master the materials. I'm not sewing for 20 years. I'll do one sewing project and just, it's a mess. You know what I mean? I'm just trying to get in there.
As soon as you get good at it.
Yeah, I'm finished with it.
Right. So, and that also, so there's painting and photography and drawing and sculpt, and so that's part of the reason that there's so many different kinds. It's not all paintings. It's not all book leaves. Yeah. It's every possible kind of thing.
Yes, and I think that part of that is, like you had asked me before, where I'm getting all this stuff. Yeah. It's really exciting for me to go into a thrift store in Laverne and find this discarded, like this piece. I love. I didn't get this there, but to find something that was made by somebody.
The needlepoint.
Yeah, and then it's just it's got history to it, and then I love just trying to figure out the material, like where it's tearing and how it's tearing, and then from that try to fit something in that somehow relates to it, and it gives me ideas. That's the other thing, is it's constantly, the medium is giving me ideas,
And I love too the sort of, because it's so physical, I mean, in other words, the idea of combining different kinds of things into something. Nice.
Okay.
Nice.
It's okay, don't worry about it. That's what I'm saying. It's going to be, that's part of it.
Yeah. It's like when they blew up the mountain. Yeah, exactly. That's like a reenactment.
Yeah, I might have to give you some credit for that.
Yeah. Well, as I was saying, the physicality of it. No, but because you're not, in other words, it's not in Photoshop where you're just combining different kinds of imagery. And then if it needs to be an inch smaller, you can make it an inch smaller. It's like, no, this is the size that it is. So it fits or it doesn't. Yeah. You can see it through this hole or you can't. Yeah. And that's kind of it. You don't really have those other options. So it has to be, for lack of a better word, like analog, extremely freaking analog. Mm-hmm. Not just by hand, but in no way. This is, the technology that you're using could be 200 years old, mm-hmm. except for some photographs, Yeah. So that is what I'm really noticing too in person, which I think is really a kind of a nice reason to come to a studio and see it. You don't have a computer hard drive full of image files. You have piles of objects and images and suitcases full of, deracinated book leaves and all this stuff. It just gives it a real, that's Elmer's glue over there, right? What? I don't even, you know what I mean? So that to me is part of, I think it really gets at what you were saying about wanting to discover that kind of child-like relationship where you don't get, like, this is Godzilla and this is a princess and they're the same size and they exist on the same plane and I'm not worried about it. Right. That kind of almost like dreamy-ish kind of state where everything makes sense.
Right. Well, it's,
That, and it physically, it looks a lot like a classroom in here.
That's funny.
Like an art room.
I never thought about it that way, but yeah, it's true. It's like in a child's mind, those things do exist on the same plane, and it makes complete sense.
Yeah.
And why shouldn't it?
Why shouldn't it?
And those relationships, that really interests me. That world and those relationships really interest me, and I think that also the relationships between the old and the new, which is why I keep coming to, and that you could, in an artwork, span time, have this element of history and depth where you can sort of go forward and backward in time and have these relationships also.
In the same moment. Yeah, oh, I love that. Well, that's cool because we should go in the other room anyway.
The other series was called Eden, and there were 4 paintings, all, not really paintings, but collages, sort of multimedia collages. And the idea for them was to create a modern diorama, so like what you would see in the Natural History Museum, but for an adult with adult themes, but using as the base, not really the base, but using for the top piece some element from a diorama. So these were all actually taken from dioramas. The base of the painting was all done on floor plans for buildings.
Okay, like the stacks of the floor plans in your main studio.
Right. And the idea for all of this series was a relationship that had ended, a long relationship that had ended, and
which is what you meant by autobiographical and difficult.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so basically everything that you see in here relates to the relationship and the family structure and my children. And it's their drawings, their writings, it's my photos, it's elements of this person, letters from her to me, my letters, and it's all the actual items are in there.
They look really emotional. I mean, just the tearing alone, like there's so much minute, obsessive detail, but then there's also so much kind of free, radical energy with the destruction.
It goes into my own childhood, it goes into my own books that were, I mean, I normally in the past would never have actually used my children's books. I would have gone to garage sales and stuff and used, other versions of the book or buy a new one, but this is all the actual things. And the truth is, it was cathartic, but at the same time it felt right, and it wasn't, in a way it was kind of, I didn't realize this at the time, but I was in a sense kind of celebrating. There's something celebratory. They're not, to me, they're not, it has all of that madness I was going through and all of that pain and that crying, but it also has all of this beauty that I felt and even felt in the process and it made complete sense when I was making this, like what I actually was using was so completely focused, like I knew every little piece that had every little light bulb, every little touch of lace. I mean, it was very, very direct, and that also felt really wonderful.
Okay, so
after the 4 Edens, I went to the sea, and
I like that. After the 4 Edens, I went to the sea.
Yeah, and that's actually
it's a nice quote.
Well, no, it's basically this idea of a boy in a boat I've been carrying around for maybe since I was 10 years old, and my own son has kind of become that boy now. So a lot of the imagery in here is about him, but it's also about me. I used a lot, I love this little lower left corner moment here with the real boat. So that's, okay, so there's a great story. So this was in the backyard, it was discarded, and when I finished this painting, my kids knew I was working on this and they were giving me drawings for it, and when he came in to see this finished, he's like, Dada, what is that doing in there? And I was like, well, what you left in the back here? He says, Dada, that's my boat. This is copywriting.
Oh my God.
So, because his mom is studying law, so he knows about copywriting, and he wasn't so furious, but these are all things that either as a kid I had in books, or I had in my, this was an old light box from the 60s, maybe the early 60s that was in, always in my house. It's not the actual light box, it doesn't exist anymore, but this was the image of it. The net is sort of like pulling everything together, the manuals are about sailing. So this was really about my journey, also about my own kids' journey and what it was like to sort of have a family broken up and to sort of somehow be trying to survive in this sea of chaos.
And I see your Delacroix up there, so that's Rafter the Medusa.
Yeah.
Right, which is, one of the most famous lost at sea paintings in art history.
Like that's the place that I go. Some people go to the desert. For me, it is the sea. It's sort of like completely calming, and so I always would come back to this. As a child, this was always where I wanted to kind of be.
I love how epic it is. I mean, there's something really powerful about the individual images, like we saw in the other studio, where it's one image and you've done, the thing to it. But this accumulation is kind of incredible, just as its own kind of act.
Right. Well, yeah, I think that the other room is more like, if you took this painting apart or this piece apart and you made it 100 pieces, that's what the other room is. You know what I mean? It's like little moments rather than all of that over each other and behind each other, and I think that's what
there's a kind of an oceanic quality to the entire thing because of the way that you've done it. I mean, spending more time with it, it's sort of like the ripped edges are like little white caps. I mean, that's what they look like, right? Yeah. Like this, is kind of like a breaking wave just because of how the paper is torn and what that is like. So it's just, it works on like 100 levels at once.
Like you're saying, like
You could just get lost in this.
like this, like you're saying this white cap, which is interesting.
Right,
Kind of
that without the content, it just looks like a frothy wave.
Yeah.
But then there's all this
Text, and this actually says inside here, if you look at this, is taken from a kid's writing, and it says "We fight." You see, if you look here, a lot of the words.
Yeah. Beautiful. And so from the ocean.
So from the ocean, I went to Eden. So this is not back. It is kind of back to Eden, but this painting is called the Garden, and it's like the Garden of Eden. And I was in a much different place than I was. Actually, I wasn't in a huge different place, but I was in a different place after passing. I wanted to make a massive piece that I felt like was sort of the grand finale of this whole series. That I was able to put all my this was it.
It's much more peaceful.
I was done at this point, you know.
But it looks like that.
Yeah.
I mean, for one thing, there's much bigger, uninterrupted images, and it's just a little homier. It's like, it's just lovely, you know. And look at, there's like house story, you know. There's domestic. Okay, there's a little, you know, she's crying, but basically, it's just a much more harmonious. That's the word I've been looking for.
You're not sort of like, this I feel like engulfs you, and you're
Yes.
sort of like, you can't escape this sea, and this is much more pastoral, and you do still have these elements of sort of longing and loss. And
Look, you're being rescued by Saint Bernard. I mean, that's like the best painting I've ever seen.
Right. That was amazing. And this kind of, some of the idea of this is like a modern pop-up book for adults, that you could also sort of like open doors and windows, and you know, this was a I think it was Mary Poppins, and I had saved this for probably 10 years, and it's got all these great little areas that sort of open, and behind doors you have other little stories. So that was kind of what I wanted to do with the whole piece.
Yeah, I totally see it.
And you see a lot of women with their back to me.
Yes, I wasn't going to know.
Yeah. And
no, it is, or their eyes covered, or yeah.
And that's sort of just, you know, the inability to reach somebody, and the inability to kind of connect and make contact.
But that it's sort of okay, it seems like, a little bit in this piece.
It is sort of. I'm drawn. I mean, well, no, you're right. Unfortunately, I am drawn to that. So it is sort of okay. Even before this, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's something that interests me. That sort of idea of Orpheus and Eurydice, that there's somebody that you love, but you can't. You can't completely have what it is that you want, right?
Yeah.
Which is interesting.
Oh, there's the wolf again.
Yeah.
Except he's wearing like a parlor suit this time.
Actually, my little girl said that to me. She was like, "Dada, can you draw an animal?" And I was like, "Sure." She says, "Are you going to put it in a suit? Because you always put clothes on him." I was like, "I do." She's like, "Yeah."
Well, ta-da! There you go. Excellent. Okay. I want to talk a little bit about these too, because we had a really interesting sort of pre-conversation about this piece, which I think touched on something really nice, which is your use of specifically the found sort of thrift store paintings. You know, among the many, many kinds of things you use, this sort of prevalent thing, and how I realized I know a fair number of artists who do that for different reasons, but that for the vast majority of artists who use these kinds of paintings in their work or in installations or whatever, that it's done with a kind of irony, it's done as a kind of commentary on high and low and outsider, it's done as it's set up as like a straw man so that modernism or pop surrealism can knock it down. You know, it's like, it's a bunch of things, but it's rarely sincere. It's rarely, I love this painting the way it is. That's the one way that people in our generation hardly ever use this kind of found art. But I noticed in the other room, and even in the places where you've destroyed them more, but especially in this piece because of how much of it you left intact, I really realized that there's no irony at all in the way that that's done. And, you know, then I started realizing that that was sort of true throughout. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about just sort of, you know, that, like, have paintings always been among the things you've collected, or because they're other people's actual fine art in a way that might be different from some of the other source materials, if that's something that you ponder while you're using them.
Great question. I have to think about it a little bit. I think that when I was really young and I'd go to the museum and I would see, paintings that gave me the chills that I saw, and I thought, this is really what I want to do, but I want to do it in another way. There is a respect for the work, and I'm sort of getting my way through your question because I'm thinking about it for the first time in a sense. This Raphael paint, this was based on St. George. I love this painting. I love the composition of it. I love the colors, the way the light was painted, the contrast of it. So I think that in my destroying it or using it or stealing from it, I also am keeping the integrity of the work in a sense. Like maybe that's what this negative space is about. And it's instinctual. I'm not, like you said, there's no gimmick to it. I'm not trying to make a commentary on, Raphael today and whether he's important or how I'm going to stick my own mark on it. It's more utilizing this beautiful piece that in some way invokes a similar idea of what I want to say. This idea of battling this dragon in St. George interests me. His use of negative space interests me. This large sort of U shape that is in the actual painting, I found interesting, and I wanted in some way to explore it in a similar way, but in a modern way, and use my own imagery so that I could sort of span this period of time.
So rather than just sort of trying to interpret its influence on you, you just used it.
Right.
It just went direct.
Yeah.
Which is interesting to me because it kind of puts a great famous Raphael painting on exactly an even footing with a kid's book from 1974. Because they're the same once they're in your work, right? Which is kind of like what we were talking about. I'm just realizing right now, and I'm like blowing my own mind. Yeah. When we were talking about how kids play, and it's like, that's a princess, that's Godzilla, who cares? They're having a tea party, they get in a fight. Don't bother me about the internal logic that's happening here. And that kind of existing on the same plane of all the different things that shouldn't. I just realized right now when you were talking about Raphael that that's exactly what that is.
Yeah.
See?
No, and I think you're right. You're right. And I'm saying, like, while you're saying that, I'm thinking about the Super Bowl. To me, this could be in that piece. It makes complete sense because...
And there's an airplane in it because why wouldn't there be?
Right, exactly.
An airplane in your Super Bowl.
Exactly.
Excellent. Okay, I'm so happy. I think we should leave it there. And oh my gosh, this has been my favorite guinea pig moment. I couldn't have picked a better person to start this part of the show with.
Thank you so much.
It was really good. Thank you, Chad. I've really enjoyed this. I think our viewers will too. So let us know what you think about the new Criticam format. Your feedback's important. Thanks for staying with us, and we'll see you on another edition of Critic.